United Airlines says that the spike in COVID cases is now being reflected and taking its tolls on bookings. Bookings are down and cancellations are once again starting to rise. United may have to trim the schedule even more in the fourth quarter and already planning cuts of 55%. The CEO Scott Kirby, you remember I spoke to earlier in the week when we already knew that how bad things were getting, he told me that bookings had stalled.
We are seeing an impact from the third wave. Bookings were growing steadily every week, and they've kind of flatlined and maybe even down slightly, but essentially they've flatlined. So they haven't really regressed like they did back in July in the second wave, but they've stopped going up. Look, all that doesn't really matter for the long term. The long term is, we said earlier, is about getting to the vaccine, and that's how we're going to get to the other side of this crisis. We've all along expected ups and downs. We're in one of the downs. This goes in waves, and we're at a peak right now, hopefully a peak, and hopefully we'll start to level out soon, but that definitely impacts bookings.
Have you now got sufficient liquidity to see you through whatever happens? I mean, you've virtually, I mean, talk about turn the sofa upside down. You found everything that you possibly can. And related to that, two parts of the same question. Would you expect that you won't have to make any further furloughs as a third wave bites?
Yeah. So we raised about $23 billion. United has been a leader around the world in some creative financing structures to make it through the crisis. So I'm highly confident that we can make it through the crisis, but that we're cutting deeply as we're going through. And we have people on furlough that don't deserve to be on furlough. This is happening through no fault of their own. And in order to be prepared to really fuel the economic recovery, I think there is going to be a big bounce back once there's vaccines. We really need all of our people here throughout the crisis, ready to go, ready to participate in the recovery. And that's the economic argument to the government is, well, we can survive the crisis. We won't be as able to fuel the economic recovery without government support to get us through the rest of the crisis.
At what point will you start growing the route again? I mean, you're doing it in certain isolated cases, but you know what I mean. At what point do you, I mean, capacity is down heavily. What point do you start to really grow it?
It really depends on how long it takes the vaccines to be distributed and made available. My guess is that is sometime in 2022. Could be a little earlier, could be a little later. It really depends on the vaccine.
What was the worst day of cash burn? And second part of that, what did it feel like?
So the largest cash burn when this first started, we were still flat at 100% of our schedule, 100% of our costs, and revenue had gone down 98%. So it was something on the order of $100 million per day. And that was really scary. The good thing for United is we've been ahead of the curve. We started planning for this the last weekend of February, before anyone else did. The weekend it first started appearing in Italy. And because of that, we were ahead of the curve. And by March 10th, we'd already raised $2 billion when everyone else was saying this is probably not going to be that big of a deal.
You just took over. You took over at the height of it.
Yeah.
There is a moment, I've interviewed many airline CEOs, as you know, and there's a moment when you sit in the chair, and I don't care if you've been deputy, I don't care if you've been chief operating officer, I don't care what role you've had before, but there is a moment when you sit in that chair as the CEO and there really is nobody else to look to but yourself.
Yeah.
You look around and you think, oh, hang on, it's me now. What was it like?
You know, particularly in a crisis like this, it made the job a lot more meaningful, important, and impactful. I did feel the weight of that, particularly as I thought about our people. And that was by far the hardest element of this for me. It from the beginning, I mean, really all the way back to March, the course of the pandemic, seemed almost inevitable to us. We were right down the middle of the fairway on forecasting what was going to happen. We were never really surprised by the virus and the way it has progressed. But what that meant was I could see what that was going to mean to the people of United Airlines. And that was hard to think about what that meant. It was great that the government stepped in and the CARES Act won. Appreciate their support. I mean, they saved the industry. They saved tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs. We do need that again. But that was by far the hardest part, coming into a job, excited about the future, but having to get through hell, to quote another Churchill quote again, before we could move forward.